Have you ever heard of the Philistines? Those classic enemies of Israel in the Bible stories. But what really happened to them? Did they vanish from the map? Were they wiped out? Or could it be that what you think you know is only a fragment of a much larger narrative one, filled with unexpected twists? Most people have no idea, but behind their image as biblical villains, the Philistines were a people with a vibrant culture, a sophisticated religion, and military power that could spark envy. They weren't just background characters in epic battles like David and Goliath. The Philistines left deep marks on Mediterranean history, marks that archaeologists are still trying to decipher today, with brushes, tools, and a whole lot of sweat under the hot Palestinian sun. In this video, you'll uncover fascinating secrets, understand why the Ark of the Covenant ended up in a pagan temple, and dive into a journey that's spiritual, historical, and even political. Get ready because the Philistines may have vanished as a people, but their influence still echoes in the modern world, in ways far deeper than you might expect. The Philistines weren't just the villains in tales like Samson or David and Goliath. They were a real and constant threat to Israel on the battlefield and in the realm of ideas. The Bible portrays them as relentless rivals, but there was something deeper in this confrontation. A collision of cultures, of spiritualities, and of worldviews. And Hay-Race, the most curious part. These ancient enemies came from far away, possibly from the Aegean Islands, as part of the feared Sea Peoples, a foreign nation that dared to settle on the southern coast of Canaan. They occupied a strategic strip of land, dominated trade routes, and imposed their presence with force. The region known as the Penipolis, made up of 5 major cities like Gaza, Ashdod, and Ekron, became a powerful confederation. This deeply disturbed Israel, which was still struggling to become a unified nation. The tension between the two peoples was constant, but it went beyond swords and spears. It was also a struggle for spiritual space, for ethnic identity, for the right to call that land promised. This clash shaped the religious and cultural imagination of generations. When we compare the spiritual practices of the Philistines with those of Israel, the contrast is striking. It's as if their struggle also symbolized an inner battle many of us still face today. Holding on to faith in the face of external pressures, dominant cultures, and modern trends that challenge our roots. So Hay-Race the question, are the Philistines really that far removed from our current reality? Anyone who sees the Philistines only as brutal warriors is missing an incredibly rich chapter of history. This people who came from the heart of the Mediterranean brought with them a vibrant culture, influenced by Mycenaean, Egyptian, and Canaanite traditions. Just take a look at the Mycenaean pottery found in the ruins of the Pentapolis. The details, the patterns, even the techniques reveal a refined taste far beyond what you'd expect from so-called barbaric enemies. They didn't just fight, they also built, decorated, and expressed themselves artistically. Their urban architecture is equally impressive. Cities like Ashkelon and Gath had complex structures, storerooms, well-planned walls, and religious centers. The Philistine culture was organized through collaboration among the 5 main cities, a political system that was far ahead of its time. It was a kind of strategic alliancia, a mini empire where decisions were made collectively. This internal stability posed a serious challenge to Israel's tribal system. And what's even more fascinating is how this cultural sophistication influenced daily life. Their clothing, rituals, trade practices, and relationships with outsiders revealed a people more cosmopolitan than commonly believed. If you feel surrounded by a mix of cultures today through social media, globalization, worldwide influence, just imagine life in ancient Philistia, a melting pot of Mediterranean traditions pulsing in the heart of old Palestine. Their cultural diversity makes us ask, what are we missing when we oversimplify our enemies? And the Philistines weren't just ahead culturally. They had a trump card that made them nearly unbeatable in battle iron. While other nations still relied on bronze, they were already forging weapons and tools with a stronger, more effective material. This technological edge gave them strategic control over the region and enormous superiority over Israel, especially during the time of the Judges. Having iron back then was like having exclusive access to super technology, like walking around with a smartphone in an analog world. This military advantage affected everything. The Philistines controlled iron production and distribution and even restricted Israel's access to it, according to the Bible. This weakened their enemies and strengthened their economy. Better tools improved farming, construction, and even religious rituals, creating a strong, resilient society. Iron wasn't just a weapon, it was a symbol of dominance and progress. And for Israel, it was a constant threat. But perhaps what's most striking is how the Philistines didn't become arrogant with their power. They became strategic. They knew how to wield their strength, both in combat and in cultural influence. And hey, race, a deeper reflection. How many times in history and in our personal lives does the one who controls the iron set the rules? Knowledge, access, infrastructure, these shape power dynamics. The Philistines understood that. So we must ask ourselves, are we aware of what iron represents in our daily battles today? Anyone who assumes the Philistine religion was shallow or pagan in the pejorative sense is mistaken. Their spiritual life was deep, organized, and full of symbolism. Dagon, their most mentioned deity, was central, often linked to fertility and harvest. But he wasn't alone. Deities like Astarte and Beelzebub also formed part of a pantheon that reflected the values, fears, and hopes of their people. Their religious practices involved both reverence and celebration, something common in ancient belief systems. The scene where the Ark of the Covenant is placed in Dagon's temple is one of the most iconic spiritual collisions in the Bible. Scripture tells us that Dagon's statue fell before the Ark, a symbol not just of God's superiority, but of a direct clash between worldviews. The conflict wasn't only geopolitical, it became a war of meanings, of worship, of divine authority. And that scene still sparks debates today among theologians, archaeologists, and curious minds alike. Philistine temples weren't just religious centers. They were hubs of social and political influence. Priests held roles that extended far beyond spirituality, mediating conflicts, organizing events, managing resources. Their religion was fully integrated into daily life, not reserved just for sacred days. And maybe that's something worth remembering today, when many try to separate faith from everyday life, as if spirituality is only for Sundays. The Philistines, though rivals, remind us the way we worship deeply shapes the way we live. Philistine festivals weren't just public gatherings. They were cultural, political, and religious statements. Everyone joined in: leaders, priests, warriors, and common people. These celebrations combined ritual, music, food, and even sacrifices. They strengthened community bonds, marked agricultural cycles, and honored the gods. For them, celebration was a way of maintaining the spiritual order of the world. And as good Mediterraneans, they knew how to do it with passion and purpose. One of the most dramatic Philistine festivals was the one involving Samson. Captured, humiliated, and blind, he was brought into Dagon's temple during a celebration, where the Philistines mocked the God of Israel. That final moment, Samson collapsing the temple and dying with his enemies, was a symbol of divine judgment and spiritual resistance. That party, meant to be a political triumph, became a lasting image of faith and sacrifice, one that still echoes in sermons and films to this day. These celebrations reveal the human side of the Philistines. Behind the armor were people with everyday lives, joys, traditions, and struggles. It's easy to dehumanize our enemies when we see them only through the lens of war. But when we understand they had songs, dances, and hope something changes. Maybe today, in such a polarized world, remembering that even our opponents have families, faith, and celebrations can help us build bridges, or at least better understand the complexity of humanity. Not even a people with a rich culture, iron mastery, and remarkable festivals could escape the tides of history. The decline of the Philistines began under mounting pressure from great empires to the north and east. The Assyrian Empire was the first to seriously weaken them, conquering their cities and imposing heavy tributes. Later, Babylon and Persia finished the job, eroding their autonomy until there was little left of the former Pentapolis. The Philistine identity so strong for centuries was slowly worn away. But this disappearance wasn't a single dramatic event. It was a slow absorption where their culture, religion, and even their language were lost under the weight of foreign rule. There was no last day of the Philistines, like in an epic film. They were gradually blended into other populations, losing political control and even their collective memory. By the Hellenistic period, their ethnic traces had nearly vanished, leaving behind only ruins and mentions in the texts of their ancient enemies, especially the Bible. And here comes one of the most intriguing parts. Because history is often written by the victors, much about the Philistines remained hidden for centuries. But think about it. How many cultures, ideas, and even entire peoples have disappeared not because they were weak, but because their records were silenced? This reflection isn't just for scholars of religion or archaeology. It's for anyone who wants to understand how time turns even the most feared empires into dusty footnotes in a library. And yet, something of the Philistines endured. Let's take a look. Did you know that the name Palestine comes directly from Philistia? That's right. When the Romans wanted to erase the Jewish connection to the land after bloody revolts, they renamed the region Syria Palestina. It was a political move, almost a historical provocation. They took the name of Israel's old enemies, the Philistines, and used it to label the land, even though the actual Philistines no longer existed as a people. A cruel irony that still causes confusion today. It's crucial to understand that this naming doesn't imply any ethnic link between the ancient Philistines and modern Palestinians. The contexts are completely different, separated by millennia. However, the symbolism of the name carries great weight. It shows how legacies can persist, not necessarily because of those who lived the history, but because of those who rewrote it. In this case, the Philistine legacy became a sort of political echo, used to redefine geographies, identities, and narratives. What's fascinating is that even though the Philistines disappeared as an ethnic group, they left behind traces in archaeology, place names, and even modern debates about land and belonging. It's a reminder that no culture ever disappears completely. There are always remnants, memories, influences, and sometimes what survives isn't military glory or wealth, but name used, transformed, reinterpreted. It's as if time is playing a game with the pieces of history, and we're still trying to figure out the rules. In recent years, excavations in places like Ashkelon have uncovered literal treasures of information about the Philistines. Burial sites, artifacts, and even DNA fragments have been studied by archaeologists and geneticists, revealing that the Philistines had a mixed origin, part Canaanite, part European, with strong connections to populations from the Aegean Sea. This discovery supports the theory that they arrived as maritime migrants and blended with local peoples, forming a new and hybrid identity. Among the most fascinating finds are everyday objects, pottery with Mycenaean designs, ornaments that combine Eastern and Western styles. These items aren't just beautiful to look at, they tell stories. They show how the Philistines absorbed and reinterpreted traditions. They weren't a closed-off culture, but a kind of cultural laboratoria fusion zone. And that's a powerful message for our globalized world today. Living with diversity doesn't mean losing your identity. It can mean enriching it. The study of ancient DNA also reinforces the idea that ethnic identity is more fluid than we often think. The Philistines weren't a rigid, uniform group. They changed, adapted, evolved. This discovery invites us to rethink our own roots. Are we really from just one place? Or are we, like the Philistines, the result of many encounters, exchanges, and reinventions? Modern science doesn't just help us understand the past. It challenges us to look at the present with greater humility and awareness. When we trace the journey of the Philistines from military power to forgotten people, we're forced to think deeply about how history works. The strongest don't always survive. Sometimes, those who leave a lasting mark do so despite losing power. The story of the Philistines shows us that identity is a fragile construction shaped by choices, conflicts, and often impositions. And this leads to a profound question. What really defines who we are? Another provocative point is the role of faith in cultural conflicts. The Philistines and Israelites weren't just fighting over land. They were clashing over worldviews, over different gods, over opposing stories. Even today, many of our battles are still rooted in ideologies, beliefs, and inherited narratives. By understanding that ancient spiritual conflict, we can begin to see our own tensions with new eyes. Maybe instead of repeating the mistakes of the past, we can seek greater understanding, not by compromising the truth, but by recognizing the humanity in the other. And finally, there's the legacy of forgetting itself. The Philistines were nearly erased from memory, but today, they're being rediscovered with more careful, less judgmental eyes. This should make us ask, how many people's forms of knowledge or even personal experiences are we ignoring today because of bias or indifference? To remember the Philistines is more than studying the past. It's a lesson in how we interpret the present. So ask yourself, what kind of legacy are we leaving for the next generation? Walls of division or bridges of understanding? What does the story of the Philistines have to do with you today? More than you think. It teaches us that identity isn't fixed. It's a journey, constantly evolving. That real faith doesn't fear confrontation. It turns it into growth. And that even forgotten peoples can carry deep lessons about resistance, spirituality, and purpose. Maybe it's time you looked at your own story with new eyes. Who are the Philistines in your life that you need to understand better, not just fight? What spiritual practices have you been neglecting while living on autopilot? And what can you build today that might one day be remembered or rediscovered tomorrow? If this video made you reflect, touched you, or simply sparked your curiosity, be sure to subscribe to the channel. Turn on notifications so you won't miss the next episodes. We've got a lot more to explore here, from the Bible to archaeology, from faith to everyday life. And you are an essential part of this journey.